Hi all. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Amy Castoro, President and CEO of the Williams Group. I'm Jake Pasecki, Director of Business Development at Conway Wealth Group, and I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items before turning it over to Michael Conway to kick off our event. Thank you to those of you that have submitted questions with your registration. They will be answered throughout today's discussion. We will also be accepting questions throughout the presentation that will be answered at the end of our briefing. The audience is muted, so in order to submit a question, please type it into the question drop-down within the GoToWebinar navigation panel, and it will be received and asked accordingly. Please note that the thoughts and opinions expressed by the Williams Group in today's webinar do not necessarily reflect those of Conway Wealth Group. The Williams Group is a privately owned company which is not affiliated with the Conway Wealth Group or Summit Financial. The information and opinions discussed today have not been verified by us, nor do we make any representations as to their accuracy and completeness. With that said, I kick it off to Michael Conway to kick off our event.
All right, fantastic. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jake. I am Michael Conway, founder and CEO of Conway Wealth Group. So thanks for joining this special webinar with our Life and Wealth Network member, the Williams Group. Today, we're excited to present to you the Williams Group CEO and President, Amy Castoro, for a briefing to help guide families in wealth transition while maintaining family unity and harmony, which we all know can be difficult at times. So a few bullet points, topics for today's discussion include the impact of family dynamics on successful wealth transfer and what you can do today to prepare the family. Next one is what separates families that are successful and why some fail at this transition. Next, ways to start the conversation with your family. How do you even jumpstart it? How do you jump in? And then the last one for this is engaging in conversation about how much wealth is enough and how to navigate that conversation with the family, where to begin, how to phrase, and so on. So with that, I'll pause, and Zach, I'll throw it over to you. So take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. So just to give a little bit of context as to why we are having this conversation and conversations like it, many of you know we focus on this idea of aligning life and wealth. So we spend a lot of time trying to quantify not just investment gains in portfolios, but gains in the parts of life that we think actually create lasting happiness. So we try to do that by having important conversations and ensuring each client family has access to the appropriate professionals along the way. That's why we created the Life and Wealth Network, which consists of what we think are the nation's best and brightest service providers in these different areas of life. So today we're proud to have one of the network members, the Williams Group, to offer some solutions about how families can better communicate about money, prepare themselves for a successful transfer of wealth, and create a values-driven, sustainable legacy. So Amy, before turning it over to you, just some quick background. Amy, as we said, is the president and CEO of the Williams Group. And for 10 years, Amy has specialized in preparing heirs. Amy brings more than 2 decades of experience in developing leadership competence, aligning ambition with purpose, and increasing authentic communication and productivity. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Organizational Psychology from Adelphi University. She is a Master in Somatic Coaching, and she completed a 3-year business course with Hecht & Associates, which emphasized the design of new offers and optimizing threats and opportunities in business. Amy is also widely published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Harvard Business Review, among many others. So with that, Amy, welcome and take it away.
Hi, gentlemen. Hello, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here. The Williams Group has been working with different advisors for over 50 years. The Conway Wealth Group really gets that this is not just about preparing assets for families, that they see there's a big opportunity for them to prepare families for assets. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, because unless we're looking at the whole picture, we're really lending ourselves to that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves phenomenon that happens and happens globally. So today we're going to talk a lot about, is your family prepared? What does a prepared family look like? And what can you do now to prepare? The biggest thing that clients come to us about, the thing that keeps them up at night, is they want to know, how do I make sure that the transition of this wealth is not going to destroy the family? And it sounds like a crazy thing, but really almost everybody knows somebody that when wealth transitioned, it caused a pretty big hiccup in the family. The Williams Group was founded 54 years ago by Roy Williams, who came out of the NFL. He played for the 49ers. And when he came out, he noticed that a lot of his peers were losing their families. And it broke his heart because he knew exactly how hard they worked for all the wealth that they had amassed. So he wanted to find out what's going on there. And that's really how he founded the business. Our commitment is really to help families become a high-performing team. Part of what he did was create 10 questions based on some research that I'd love for all of you to sort of walk through with me now. And that's the image that's up on the screen. So if you could just make sure you've got a pen and a piece of paper handy, we're going to walk through these 10 questions, and you'll be able to get a sense of how prepared you are. This is designed for the family principles. So the first question is, our family has a mission statement that spells out the overall purpose of our wealth. Would you give that a yes or a no? The entire family participates in the most important decisions, such as designing our mission statement. So for example, some families will just have the advisor put together a mission statement for the family. This question is asking, does the whole family participate in important decisions? All family heirs have the option of participating in the management of family assets. That is a very sophisticated way to spell heirs, so I'll make sure we correct that. So the management of family assets could be anything from, how do we share the family property, to philanthropy, to learning about the assets, or going through some sort of an internship to learn about the assets. Heirs understand their future roles, have bought into those roles, and look forward to performing those roles. So for example, it's possible that the heirs are identified as trustees. Do they know what that means, and have they signed up for that? Or they're executors, or there's some expectation that they are going to work in the family business, or that they're not going to work in the family business. So what are the roles that are out there, and do the next generation understand what they are? The heirs have actually reviewed the estate plans and documents. Notice that doesn't say they know how much is going to transfer. With the Williams Group, we don't often get into the actual details of the amount because we know the amount can change. In the case of COVID, that had dramatic swings, both positive and negative for families. So it's less about the amounts, it's more about, do they have an idea of what the estate plan is? Number 6, our current wills, trusts, and other documents make the most asset distribution based on heir readiness, not their age. I've met with a number of people who are in their 50s and 60s, and they still aren't ready to receive the wealth. Ready in the sense that they can be responsible, that the wealth is not driving them, that they are driving the wealth, that they understand how to pick a good advisor or how to even listen to what they have to say in a way that doesn't just give up all their power. The family mission includes creating incentives and opportunities for our heirs. So that could be anything from if you get a 3.3 through all of your educational experience, then your tuition is completely paid for. Or it could be, an incentive might be, if you donate X amount of dollars to a cause that you care about, we'll match it. Or an incentive could be, if you're able to produce income for 5 years that's progressive, we'll put this much more into your account. So what kind of incentives exist out there, if any? Our younger children are encouraged to participate in our family philanthropic grant making decisions. By younger, I mean possibly as young as 10 years old. We have families where there was one daughter who started a lemonade stand because she wanted to collect monies to save a certain kind of species of monkey in Africa. That was about 15 years ago, and her class, that grammar school, is still donating to the same cause. Our family considers family unity to be just as important as family financial strength. When we work with families, we have two criteria. One is that they're willing to learn, and two is that they care more about each other than they do about the assets. So is family unity really important, or is competition, is the title you have, is the amount of money you make what really counts? We communicate well throughout our family and regularly meet as a family to discuss issues and changes. Very often people will say yes to this because they have a family meeting, but I ask, is that family meeting two-way communication, or is it really top down and the rest of the family members are kind of afraid to say anything? So now we're going to ask you to invite you to score that. If you've got 7 or more yeses, you're in great shape, and you're likely going to be 1 in 3 families that make that transition well. If you've got 4 to 6, then there's probably an opportunity for you to spend some time getting all of those yeses moved up a bit to make sure that your wealth is going to transition successfully. A score of less than 4, in my experiences, that's the majority of the people, that would be an alarm bell. That's where you want to pause and say, we've spent a lot of time taking care of the assets. Is it time now to pivot and start taking care of the family? And we would say it is. You can't start those conversations soon enough. As I mentioned, Roy was a football player, and the reason we use this graphic is because it's a pretty good explanation of what's happening out there in the minds of the next generation. So that front line, you've got the heirs on either side, but you've got your defense. You've got the financial advisor, the estate planner, the banks, the CPAs, the lawyers. You've got everybody lined up here. They all know what their job is, and they do it really well, and they know what everybody else's job is. The day comes where the ball, or call it the estate, is passed to one of the parents, or neither parent is left and the ball is passed to the heirs. When those heirs have to go out and catch that ball, meaning the estate plan, they're playing against these X's. These X's are the people that want to strip their wealth. That could be another Bernie Madoff. It could be a well-meaning friend that went to school with them. It could be a well-intended advisor who just doesn't have a very good plan. But the truth is, your kids have never seen a plan. They don't even know when game day is, and they really don't know who to turn to even find a uniform. So this is a useful image to use when you're having conversations with your kids to start talking about, well, what are the questions you have about the plan? And who would you turn to figure out what move to make next? We work with a lot of estate professional planning attorneys, and Nancy Henderson said it best. She said, I've been writing estate plans and trusts for many years, and I've learned that I cannot write an estate plan that fixes your kids. And yet many people think they don't have to have these conversations because they have a will. Well, there's as many different eyes interpreting that will. And so odds are pretty good it's not going to do the talking for you that you hope it will do. At the Williams Group, we define a successful transfer of wealth as the assets remain in control of the family and the family remains unified. As I mentioned, we did some research a while back, and first Roy Williams went to all the top business schools, and he said, guys, what is it that is at the root of this shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves paradigm? Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves mean in every culture all over the globe, this phenomena that the wealth doesn't make it to the 3rd generation is everywhere, pervasive. In Italy, they call it from the stalls to the stars to the stalls. In China, it's teacup to teacup. So they said, well, you know what? We're not entirely sure what the cause is. Ask the psychologists. So Roy went to the psychologist and he said, what's happening inside the families that is causing so much of this wealth to be lost? And they said, well, honestly, in our culture, we just don't really know how to talk about money. And Roy thought there's got to be a better answer than that. So he decided to ask the audience, and he interviewed over 2,500 families. And what he learned was that the #1 reason for why wealth does not transition successfully is actually not the estate plan, it's trust and communication. The biggest risk to your assets is sitting around the Thanksgiving Day table. And very few people spend time to really engage the family, to really build trust and communication. The second reason is heir readiness. This doesn't mean that they know how to read a portfolio. It means they know how to be a contribution. They're not so overshadowed by the wealth that they can find a purpose. That if they all hop in an Uber and everybody looks at them to pick up the tab, they're able to say no. So heir readiness is a much bigger conversation than just being able to understand the value of the dollar. The third reason we found was 10% of the time, and that was just that they didn't take the time to create a shared family wealth mission statement. This has to do with articulating the family values in a way that people could see themselves living into them, actually operating in them. 5% of the time is all other causes. So that would mean things like a pandemic or not great advice. Happens very rarely. Trust and communication is at the center of everything. If you have a family business, it's at the center of the business. It's at the center of the ownership that might not be working in the family business, and is at the center of all kinds of wealth preservation activities. And yet many of us don't take that action. So RBC did an interesting study, and what they found was that of 75% of high net worth individuals who say it's important to leave money to their children, only 20% say their kids are ready to handle it. And of more than half that say they would benefit from formal principles to guide the purpose and meaning of wealth, only 10% have taken action. So if you take anything from our presentation today, take that you need to take action today, because you never know what's going to happen. And it's unfair to the family to leave them unprepared. Most families operate like this. They're an informal team. And unless you take the time to really build a high-performing family team, you're going to be working at a disadvantage. Trust is, when we work with trust and communication, we break it down into 3 main categories. It's, do families do what they say they're going to do? So when you say you're going to show up at the game, do you show up at the game? When we talk about sincerity, meaning when we say that you're going to have a position in the family business, that you mean it. When we talk about competence, we say the position that you're going to show up for inside that family business is going to be one that we say you're ready for, not just because you want one. And then, of course, all of that is wrapped in care. I'm wondering, Jake, if this isn't a good place to break and go into some questions, or should we cover a few more slides?
No, absolutely, Amy. I think that's a great place to break. And now that you've given us some of the trust ways to build trust, right? One of the questions that we've seen come through is, and I think just to kind of ground people, is do you have any specific examples, obviously without naming names, of a family wealth transference that didn't go well? For example, kids not being prepared, or touching on some of the things that you've discussed in your presentation, for the audience.
Yeah, and you know what? That's actually the next slide. That happens all the time. So, for example, we had a situation where there was a grandfather who created a great deal of wealth. He passed that on to his son, and his son was ready to pass it on to his 2 sons. Unfortunately, the dad in the middle passed away all of a sudden, and the 2 boys found themselves with about 30 million. They were not really prepared. One brother said, hey, this money started from penny stocks that granddad started for us. We should just hang on to it. And the other brother said, hey, the market's at the all-time high. I think we should actually cash it in and see if we could do something better with that. Well, about 12 years later, they had exhausted the funds through legal. And it was because they just couldn't agree and they didn't have a shared understanding of what dad really wanted them to do with that money. The biggest cost wasn't even the 30 million. It was that these two boys who had had a really tight relationship no longer did, and neither did their generations that came after them. So it's heartbreaking when a simple conversation like sell it when the price hits this number, that's 8 words, but unfortunately the family never took the time to do it. We hear those stories all the time. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I have a question for you. You and I have talked about the television show Succession.
Mm-hmm.
And on a similar theme, ironically, last night I watched the first episode of the old comedy Arrested Development.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've ever seen any of that, but my question is about this. How do you deal with children that have different skill sets? One is, I'll make it up, the Ivy Leaguer, and then the other is a gamer, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Because that's conflict unto itself. They all think they deserve the same thing, but they have different skill sets.
Happens all the time. I mean, that's the joy of every family, that every kid is different.
Yeah.
The way to handle that is a public conversation. So the gamer, the conversation there is, well, what's the plan? How are you going to take care of your own expenses? How are you going to be able to afford your own lifestyle? And as opposed to a conversation that says, oh, they're still a gamer, I need to cover their cell phone. Oh, they're still a gamer and they're 30 years old and I'm paying for their house. So that the breakdown happens when family principals think it's their job to rescue the kids. It's really important to give them their own lives and say, how's this going to work? You tell me. And then fair isn't always equal, Mike. You know, sometimes families say to us, well, yeah, we're just going to give them all the same amount and walk away. Well, not all kids are built the same way, as I said earlier. One could have a learning disability, or one could have a certain situation where they need more help than others. And when you really do the accounting, it's very difficult to make it equal. If you really look at it, we had a situation where one daughter had gotten a divorce and it was a very expensive divorce. And the other daughter said, you know what, when mom and dad pass, she's going to get the same amount as me, but she's already gotten a lot. And so the conversation, when you get into that story about what's fair versus equal, is really tricky. It's more important to have a conversation that you'll be able to decide who gets what because you deem it necessary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. The next question that we have is coming in is, how should a parent start these conversations regarding wealth transfer? So I'm assuming the audience took good notes on the 10-question quiz. So that's a starting point, but if you can elaborate a little bit on that, I think that would be great.
I sure can. And so this is a great slide for that. What this says is you can start these conversations by simply asking, what is the purpose of our wealth? And notice when the family principal goes to answer that question, they should take their hand and put it over their mouth. So if you really want to start these conversations, make it a conversation. Ask them, what do they see is the purpose of the wealth? What is their expectation? How do they see they can be a contribution to the wealth? Just get curious. And I say that with this slide because in green families, families where there's low risk, families where they're in pretty good shape, they're able to have open and honest conversations. And so in this kind of situation, you want to start that by capturing the best practices. You want to get maybe some training on how to work through conflict because every family has its own patterns there. But for the most part, you should be able to move into, let's talk about our values. What's important to us? How do we know, what do we mean by hard work? What does it mean to be responsible for your own life? So invite them, when do you think you should come off the family payroll? because they have answers. Let me just go with this real quick, Jake, because these green families, this is low risk, but it's useful to know, am I a yellow risk or a red risk? So medium risk means your advisor is the person that's having these conversations with your family. You're reluctant, or the conversations are perfunctory. The parents are unwilling to share the estate plan. Family members are jockeying for position in the company. They think, each of them think they're going to get the nod on being able to run that company. Cordial hypocrisy is predominant. What that means is everybody's very pleasant and super nice and they're very friendly, but when they leave, it's a whole different story. So in the family meeting, when everybody's saying, yes, great idea, but then when mom and dad are on the other side of the daisies, they're not at all bought in. So you want to take a look at, where are we in this risk cycle? And then families who are high risk, you want to think about, they haven't come together in 5 years. There's some whispers or jokes about litigation. Maybe the family has a foundation, but the way they make decisions within it or within the family business are dysfunctional. Not everybody's got a voice, and it's very authoritarian, and the next generation's just there for a paycheck. Sometimes wealth is used as a weapon so that it becomes coercive. Distrust is prominent, and maybe there's an immediate disruption about to happen. Maybe it's the succession plan is being tested. Maybe somebody's passed all of a sudden. But in this case, you want to hire somebody from the outside to help you out.
Thank you for that. So just to kind of piggyback on that, and we talked about trust within the family. What about some families that are thinking that the wealth and the family wealth, and as it's passed down, will create a lack of motivation in the inheriting generation? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that is the number one concern we hear. The antidote to that is ask the kids what's the purpose of their life. And that sounds like a huge question, but it's an important question. Why do they get out of bed every morning? Sometimes the way to ask that question is, if you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be? And then back that dog into a solution. So if they said global warming, then it might be, okay, what's interesting about that? Maybe they start looking at agriculture, and then the family network becomes important. Then it's, why don't you have a conversation with this person? Why don't you have a conversation with this person? So that motivation is coming from a place very often where the kids feel overwhelmed, that mom and dad did this amazing thing and they created all this tremendous wealth, and that they'll never be able to do it. And in some cases, they're right. I mean, it's 1 in a million that people can make the kind of wealth that we get to work with every day. But the real question is, who are they becoming, the next generation? And what gets them out of bed in the morning? And how do they see they could be a contribution? Because frankly, in some families, there's enough wealth where they don't have to work. They don't have to earn an income. But they do need to be a contribution. And what does that look like? Is that going to be through philanthropy, through charity? We worked with one family where they were fairly well off. The dad had 3 children. And when we met the kids, they said, you know, every month is a walk of shame. Dad bought our house. He put us in a great couple of country clubs. We drive fantastic cars. We go on amazing vacations. And we can't earn enough money to support that. So every month we have to go back and ask for more money, and it's embarrassing. And so what we were able to do was equalize the playing field. We're able to have an open and honest conversation with the family where the dad said, I'm happy to do this for you, but I still want you to have some kind of reason for getting out of bed in the morning. You don't have to pay for it all, but you do have to have a purpose. And sure enough, one was a vet technician, one was a substitute teacher. And when they had that conversation, it took the weight off their shoulders.
Fantastic. And just to add on to that, and maybe you can give us an example or how the Williams Group, you and your work with families like this. if you talk to your children about what is important to them, and there's a divergence from actually how the family generated their wealth or how they made their wealth, and I'll give, an extreme example of, if somebody was in fossil fuels, right, and now we're talking about renewable energy that's really important to the younger generation. How do you bridge that gap? And in terms of determining the mission statement, number one, but also what is important to the children.
Jake, you must have been a fly on the wall in one of our family meetings. That's exactly what came up. Actually, the next generation was sort of embarrassed by the way the wealth was made and felt like the footprint was damaging the world. And yet that wealth had built a hospital, and that wealth had built villages in Africa. But they couldn't see that because they didn't agree with that. And so alignment doesn't always equal agreement. We work with families to build these mission statements. Just last night, I was working with a family where one son, very different line of work than his sister. And what came out of that was a mission statement that they could both see a way to implement, but go at it from different ways. There's more than one way to skin a cat. The goal is to get everybody in alignment with the purpose and then have more than one way to get there. The richness of what the next generation can bring to the table is so exciting. So the agreement doesn't have to equal, alignment doesn't have to equal agreement.
Understood.
Amy, could I ask a follow-up to that? So it's a really interesting, important point in our shoes as the advisor and sort of our philosophy in the Conway business, we're trying to create alignment using the values that we are trying to understand of the family. We're trying to take those values to create alignment across everything that they're doing to some degree, right? So the business that they run, what they're doing from a charitable perspective, what that investment portfolio looks like, if it's values aligned to align with everything else, and then what the estate plan looks like. To your point, they may not be in perfect alignment of how they want to use those dollars in whatever particular way. And so does it become a question of sequencing? In other words, we're not perfectly aligned on this is what we want to be doing with the wealth today. The wealth still exists in the names of mom and dad. So we have this, sort of multi-pronged mission statement because we're not perfectly aligned on what we want to accomplish right now. But the wealth will at some point become the children's and grandchildren's, and then the mission statement becomes in effect for those next generations in a more specific way to each of those generations. So it sort of, I guess, becomes a sequencing question for you of, this is the approach today, and this could be the approach tomorrow for this group and so on, but let's be on the same page about that overall game plan now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that last bit you said is key. So sometimes you gotta hang in the discomfort of the lack of alignment until you can get to alignment.
Right.
So when people say we're sort of in alignment, that's a red flag. But if everybody can agree that this is mom and dad's plan and that when the wealth transition, the kids can take it over and here's what they're gonna do with it or they expect to do with it, as long as that's a public conversation and everybody's on the same page, you're not gonna get that cordial hypocrisy.
Right.
So yeah, in that case, it's sequencing. Yeah.
So my follow-up question to that, and I've talked to you about this, Amy, not that I would ever do this, but how do you get the primary who's potentially made the money, right? So mom and dad made the money and may have a very particular way of seeing the world, how they vote, how they worship, their charities, and the kids may have a completely different view. Mm-hmm. So how do you help the primary that, again, it wouldn't be me, stuck in their ways, but how do you help navigate that?
Yeah, and sometimes that's just a misunderstanding. So we worked with a family where mom and dad were really deeply committed to giving to a certain charity. It was a religious cause. And the next generation really didn't have any interest in that. And in a meeting, we finally turned to mom and dad and said, so what is it about this cause that's so important to you? Tell us about what the meaning is. And for the first time in their lives, the kids saw their dad cry because he was so passionate and so grateful for what that organization had done for him. And so when the kids understood that, they were then able to volunteer what percentage of their wealth they were going to give to the cause, because it was no longer about the cause. It was about dad and what they cared about. So very often, Mike, it's just they haven't had the conversation and there's a misunderstanding.
Sure. Thank you.
So Amy, our next question is around our current circumstance in the eyes of the pandemic. So the question is, what unique challenges are you seeing as a result of the pandemic among the families that you work with, and how are you helping them?
You know, I keep reading divorce rates are going through the roof, so that's not a good thing. And China reported the same thing. So what we're seeing is, first there was this worry of, you know what, we've got this estate, I'm not worried about transitioning it, I'm in good health, I don't expect anything to happen, I can keep kicking that can down the road. Then the pandemic hits and people start dying. And so then they wake up and they say, whoa, we got to get on top of this. We got to make sure we're dealing with this estate plan. I'd rather be ahead of this curve than behind. Then everybody's living under the same roof. And they say, oh, the reason we're not talking about this estate plan is because we don't know how to talk about it. And the conflict under the same roof starts to increase. Or worse, people aren't under the same roof and there's less communication with each other. So what we're seeing is a magnified urgency for people to build the skill to have these conversations go well. The reason people don't talk about the estate plan is because they don't trust themselves to have that conversation go well. And we agree. There's good reason why people haven't had these conversations. It's usually because the skill is not in place to have the conversation go well. They're worried about conflict. So we're seeing heightened awareness. We're busier than we've ever been. That people are reaching out and saying, okay, I've got advisors to help me manage the money. Now I need an advisor to talk about it. Make sure the family's in good shape. So yeah, if anything, the pandemic has increased the urgency. I was working with a family where, unfortunately, they were negatively impacted by the estate plan. I'm sorry, by the pandemic. The dad could no longer afford to pay the salary of his son, and he wanted to give him access to his trust sooner. The reason he hadn't given him access to the trust was because, frankly, he didn't trust him to be responsible with money. And he was 32 years old. So the conversation wasn't about whether or not he could pay him. The conversation was about, what does it mean to be responsible with wealth, and can we get on the same page? As soon as he gave the kid access to his trust, the kid jumped into the family business, no holds barred, and the business is doing better than ever. And he's not even getting paid for it. It had to do with trust and communication.
Wow, for sure. So along the same lines, and this is a question of, a lot of people are feeling powerless right now, and they want to get some control over the situation that is affecting us all. So what are the key things that family leaders should be doing right now? And just as importantly, what are the key things that they should not be doing right now?
Yeah, so the first thing they should be doing is getting educated, right? That's the very first thing they need to do. They need to start reading. They need to be talking to people who have transitioned their wealth successfully, and they need to do that 10-question quiz. We do have another assessment that's 50 questions that the whole family can take on an anonymous level, and they can get a read on where they stand with trust and communication, air preparedness, and values and mission. Those are the 3 core drivers that we know a family will be successful or not. Here's a family that took the assessment. 3 meetings later, they were all above that line. So they had a lot more confidence that they were going to be successful. I would say leave the bull riding to the professionals. You can open the gate to these conversations, but it's a little like trying to teach your son or daughter how to drive. It's very hard to coach your own family. So I would say thinking about ways that you could bring in experts to have some conversations at some level. Even your advisor can get the conversation started. Just make a list of the topics that are a little outside their comfort zone. At least that way you've got some of the issues on the table.
Hey, yeah, Amy, so a follow-up to that and talking about, I think unfortunately you probably deal with reactionary situations rather than the family is choosing right now to be proactive and engage you. So I imagine you kind of walk into some "I told you so" situations fairly often, unfortunately.
Right.
And I guess the question is, so whether it's issues that have arisen from the pandemic or some specific conflict between brother and sister, or whatever internal conflict, you're being brought in to address that immediate problem. They're reacting to that immediate problem. They're looking for outside help. They're looking for a fixer, right? Come solve this issue, not come create the foundation to avoid these issues in the future. So I guess the question is, just with your process, how do you kind of unwind that? How do you at the same time maybe address that issue in the ways that you need to kind of put out that fire, but redirect the family to, okay, we got to kind of take a step back here and create a larger game plan?
Yeah, not all of our families that come to us are in some kind of trouble. For the most part, they're in good shape and they just want to start having some of these conversations with their family. So in that instance, they are ahead of the curve, a lot easier, process goes a lot faster, and they're in great shape sooner. Some families come to us because there is some discord. Maybe there's two people working in the family business and one thinks they should have a bigger share. I had a husband and wife come to me because they weren't on the same page with their philanthropy, but when we got underneath it, it was a much bigger conversation. They did not want to bring somebody in to help them. They thought they could do it themselves. And about a year later, I spoke to the dad roughly 3 weeks ago now. And unfortunately, rather than paying for the program, he's losing half his wealth to divorce. So if I can encourage people to make an investment here, it's to start this process sooner than later. We start with an assessment, that 50-question assessment, the 10-question. We do some one-on-one interviews. The next phase for us is awareness. We're building the skills. We're teaching, giving them some new tools in the toolbox to have the important conversations they've been waiting to have. We have those conversations while they're learning those tools. And then finally, it's action. How do we put this mission values into action so that it's not just a pretty picture, but something that's actually moving? So whether the family is dealing with conflict or not, we want to get them started by learning the skills to have these conversations sooner than later.
Thank you, Amy. The next question that we have is related to the future generation actually starting the conversation. So we talk about preparing heirs and the onus being on those that are transferring the wealth. What about flipping that? And so we have a situation where the grandfather never talked to the father about wealth and so on, and the kids are recognizing this and they're the inheriting generation and they want to start that conversation with their parents. Can you walk us through a little bit how that works?
Yeah, that's a little like pushing a boulder uphill. I'm not gonna lie. That's a tough one because mom and dad think they've got this all figured out. They made the wealth. The skills that make the wealth are not the same skills that give it away. And it's a tough sell. I'll be perfectly honest. And it happens. I'm working with a family now where the daughter and I were talking for almost a year before the dad was willing to get on the phone. The best thing they can say, in my interpretation, is, Dad, the whole point of this wealth is so that we have a better life. But from over here, there's a lot of things that we need to talk about that we're not talking about. I want to bring an expert in to help move us through those conversations successfully. So hopefully mom and dad will listen. We do have a pretty good book mom and dad usually like. It does offer a lot of insight where they can maybe walk through some of these questions on their own. It's called Bridging Generations. You can get it on Amazon. But the more the next gen can educate their parents about why it's important to them to get this process started, the better off they're going to be.
Fantastic. Thank you for
And
that.
Amy, just for the record, Mike listens to everything I suggest all the time.
Oh, outstanding.
So we're good.
Good job.
Have you ever, I think you've probably dealt with this one before, where you have the primary give ownership in the business to, let's say, two siblings. And then one sibling ends up running the business and the other is involved, or maybe even not so much, maybe not involved at all. How do you have the conversations with the sibling, that is not involved? What does that look like?
Well, it depends on what conversation you want to have. If it's about distributions, then there's a family conversation about how that's going to work. Are we organizing around equality, which is almost impossible in that situation? Are we organizing around the next 5 generations? And so the corpus of the business will continue to grow and not distribute. That is just a conversation about one son or daughter chose to work in the business and the other one did not. If they're not working in the business because they didn't choose it, what's the standards? What are the criteria for them to have a position in the business? Is that going to be generated by competence, which is what we would recommend, by available positions in the business, as opposed to them just finding a spot for the next gen? That's a slippery slope. So really, it's a conversation about what are we organizing around here? Are we organizing around having the business grow so it takes care of the family for generations? And how do we have the explicit conversations that are necessary in support of that goal? If you're selling the business, then there's a conversation within the family about what they think is fair. Governance is not always the solution. A lot of families come to us and say, we've got a great governance structure, meaning we've got a great succession plan. We've got a great plan for when we sell the business. Exit strategies are in place. The governance is half the work. The governance is really just a deflection of the estate plan. You still have to figure out how are we going to navigate, and I use the word navigate intentionally, the conversations that are required to have this work. It's like the estate plan or the governance structure or the wealth builds this wonderful cathedral, but how everybody lives within that cathedral is what makes or breaks it. So really, I can't impress enough how important it is to build the skill to have the conversations that build unity, and that's where the confidence comes in, that your wealth will not destroy the family.
Can I'm going to ask my last question, Amy, and it's really just piggybacking what you just covered, but the concept of fairness is, I think, can be at the core of conflict, right?
Yeah.
What's fair? Who should get what? This person was involved in building the business. This person wasn't. And I would imagine some families look at you and say, be the arbiter of fairness. What is objectively fair here? And I think you're making the point. The onus of that is really on the family, arguably should have created that, what the concept of fairness even means before the conflict arose. And so I guess that's it. You're just kind of coaching toward, you need to determine what fairness means. It's not going to be perfect, but I can't be the divvier upper for the family of how to move assets around.
We can facilitate a conversation to get the ideas on the table.
Right.
Every family has its own mission statement. The advisor that walks in and says, I'll write your mission statement for you, or I will determine the exit strategy, or I will tell you what's fair, that's dangerous because nobody does it. Nobody's taking responsibility for it. The slide that's up now are actual wealth mission statements that we've worked with other families to help build. And this is what you can use as the cornerstone to make some of those decisions. So to create an environment for making choices that benefit us and the world for generations to come. So create an environment for making choices that benefit us. Is it beneficial for everyone to just get $200,000 a year? Only the family can decide that.
Yep.
What are we organizing? It's fascinating. You know, I worked with a family, I'll make this quick, where the dad and his brothers ran a very successful construction real estate business, and they all had children of their own. The oldest, next gen, came to one of the family meetings, and they were talking about the family mission statement, and the dad said, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, everybody's going to spend time pushing a broom in the construction sites. And the son, who had just graduated the Stern School, great score, MBA, knocked it out of the park, picked up his phone and said, Dad, I can run the family business with this phone in my hand, and you want to put a broom in it? Meaning the kid was ready to make some money. He was ready to take this business to the next level. And the dad said, absolutely. All the more reason because of what you just said. In other words, our mission statement is about humility. Our mission statement is about taking care of the people who helped us build this business. Our mission statement is about hard work. And that comes from getting your hands dirty. And so the mission statement in that instance, in that moment, really is what informed their decision about who's going to do what in the business. And today they have a great rotation program and an internship, and everybody starts with a broom.
Yeah, fantastic.
Great. So that concludes our questions for today. So thank you, Amy. I'm just going to kick it over to Michael Conway to close down our event here. But thank you all for those who joined and submitted questions.
This has been great. So thank you all for joining us today. And Amy, a special thanks to you for a fantastic discussion and for providing us with a roadmap to discuss wealth transfer while maintaining family unity and harmony, because at the end of the day, that is what's really important, right? We always say this, the webinar was recorded, so we'll be sharing the recording with attendees in a follow-up email, and then it will sit and rest eventually when it's done on the Conway Wealth Group website. At any time, please feel free to reach out to us with more questions. In the meantime, we hope you and your loved ones continue to have a fantastic start to 2021. Stay safe, and thanks for joining. And Amy, great job. Thanks a million.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, Amy.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
This is great. Thank you.
Sure.